needed some warming up of the crowd this morning. That was good when we got the crowd warmed up a little bit. Really delighted to be here with you today for a couple of reasons. First, I feel like I'm in a room with a big, large group of peers, and that feels very warm, very comforting to me. It looks like I might need some help up here getting the screen into full screen mode, if anybody can come up and help. And then second, it almost feels a little bit, if anybody can relate to this, like I'm a teenager at the MTV Music Awards, which probably deserves a little explanation. You don't have to worry, I won't sing, and I certainly can't squeal as high as a teenager. But I do feel that I'm here with a bunch of people that I've spent a long time learning from. It was many, many years ago that I started to think about service design in healthcare in the United States, and I focused a lot of my attention on inspiring large healthcare organizations to realize the potential of service design. And at the time I started to do this, there were only a few, organizations and people, clearly not as many as I'd like there to be, that were thinking about this, and most of those firms were in Europe. So my inspiration came from a global, basically learning process of seeing some of the greatest and the best thinking, from around the world and bringing that into my work here in the United States. So it feels really good and very humbling to be here on stage to share some perspectives with you today. So as I thought a little bit about what to talk about, I certainly did not feel like I could share my expertise around service blueprinting or live environment prototyping and other specific elements, but rather share some perspectives with you from a long time designing healthcare services and figuring out how to bring service design into large organizations with a particular lens on the gaps, not the gaps within the organizations themselves, but the contextual gaps within the industry overall. And that's where I'd like to begin, is a little bit of a focus around the gaps in healthcare, which either lead or don't lead to the opportunity to deliver on the full potential of great service design and experiences. I think a lot of us appreciate the value and the importance of context. Context being, the things that surround a service or an experience. Then you get down below service and experience and you start to digest and look at all of the elements, and certainly there's a load of complexity there, but I wanted to bring it up a level and focus a little bit on the context and the elements and why and how to think about those things so that when you're working on those service design and the elements around it, you can think about and be the most successful as possible. So a little bit of a history here around healthcare, and particularly United States healthcare, because that's the context, the external context. So healthcare in the United States has went through a bunch of cycles here, and this is my kind of perspective on the cycles and the focus for the United States healthcare industry. And if you look back to around the 1980s, a lot of the focus within the industry itself was around safety. How can we make the healthcare services and experiences the safest possible? Which is very, very logical and very understandable. And then it shifted into quality around the 1990s. And this was an uptake of a lot of the things that were going around in the world around total quality and management, Lean, Six Sigma, and all of those things started to actually founded around the time when these things started to take off. Now, quality didn't replace safety. These things are now overlapping in this very high-level era analysis. Then it shifted to a focus on access and creating greater accessibility for large and diverse groups, disadvantaged groups primarily, but also creating better access for the capacity of the system itself. A lot of the focus at this time was in optimizing, the efficiency and the productivity and in creating more capacity with the existing resources available. And then most recently, and this is a huge driver in the healthcare industry in the United States today, is this topic and this concept of consumerism. Now I'll speak a little bit more to consumerism in a moment, but what's happened over these 40 years or so is that I'm going to overlay costs on here. So from the 1980s to the 1990s, the overall cost or the spending on the U.S. healthcare system went up to about $250 million. And there from the next 10 or 15 so years went from $250 million to $3 trillion. And many of you know the next step in this story as well. $3 trillion to $6 trillion spent in the United States healthcare system. And so if you look at that overlay and you compare a little bit now of what we're getting for that spending, well, first let's acknowledge that that spending is a lot more per capita than most any other country in the modern world spends on healthcare services. So there's large and significant dollars being put into how do we deliver the best and the most appropriate healthcare services in the United States. The somewhat disappointing part about that is that the United States ranks lowest in the quality of those healthcare services when compared to other countries. And you sum that up and you look at that and you look at this is what we've created, this is what we've gotten to in the United States healthcare industry is an extraordinary amount of cost and not exactly the best health outcomes that we can get for that. And if you sum up the state of the United States healthcare industry, you can't say much more than this is the situation. Extraordinary costs and not quite the right healthcare outcomes that we're looking for. Something's clearly missing because we've been on that trajectory for a long time. And over the time I've spent designing and thinking about healthcare services, there's one thing that's kind of stood out in my mind ever since the beginning, ever since I started designing healthcare, that there's something not quite right, there's something missing. It may seem pretty obvious, and I wish it were more obvious. This is what's missing from healthcare services today. How can that be missing? It's healthcare. It's built right into the name, for gosh sakes. It's healthcare. Care's built in. It's part of it. But that's the problem. It's assumed. It's assumed that the care is there in the healthcare, and it's been assumed for far too long. And when it's assumed, we don't design for it. And when we don't design for it, we see implications of that. For example, more than 60% of our healthcare providers are burnt out or frustrated with their profession. 60%, probably more by some estimates. In that situation, how do you expect to deliver an extraordinary service when your primary point of service delivery is frustrated or burned out with their jobs? It becomes nearly impossible. And that's kind of an artifact of a system that has really been designed around policymakers and business interests, not necessarily misaligned with the interests of healthcare professionals and patients, but maybe just a bit overlooked. We spent a lot of energy designing the system around a lot of those interests and kind of forgetting or maybe assuming again that the caring nature of healthcare services is just something that's authentically built into the minds and the goodwill of our healthcare professionals. But we've designed then a system around them that pretty much prevents them from doing what got them into the profession to begin with. I really believe that a revolution in service and a revolution in caring particularly is the answer to transforming healthcare. And this is a little different than the current wave around consumerism. And I want to make that clear, and I'm afraid actually a little bit that our focus around consumerism is focusing on buying. It's focusing on transactional relationships, not long-term relationships. It's focusing on using services. Don't get me wrong, I do believe there's a lot of value that comes from that focus. But you can see in some ways that focus is a little bit different and sometimes conflicting with how you would design and you would think about design for care, relationships, authentic caring, the emotions, right? The emotions involved in caring. Caring is about hugs. Caring is about tears. Caring isn't necessarily just about a financial transaction. So how do we get that back? How do we put that in the center of everything? And I believe if we do, that can result in a kind of a waterfall of transformation. So we start with care, authentic care. And that's the secret to building relationships. And this isn't just specific to healthcare. We know that caring about one another is a foundation of establishing good relationships. When good relationships happen, oftentimes trust is a result of that. It's pretty hard to have a great relationship when trust isn't a part of it, and it's oftentimes a result of establishing a good relationship or a good interaction with one another. And the beautiful thing about this kind of connection in the healthcare industry is that great care leads to greater trust. And we already see a number of healthcare organizations and a number of people pointing to the fact that trust is kind of eroded in the healthcare industry for a number of reasons. And they say, we need to get trust back. We need to get trust back. But nobody quite knows what to do about that. How do we get trust back? Well, I believe that if you back it up a couple steps, let's start with caring. And lastly, when you have that trust, and the reason why a number of healthcare organizations are looking for that is because they believe if we have trust, we can really then influence and help people either recover from illness or meet that health goal or overcome those burdens or the barriers that prevent them from getting there in the first place. This is kind of the logical framework for how and why caring is the secret to improving health. Interestingly enough, though, you don't even need that logical framework to presuppose that caring is the answer to improved health. There's a number of studies out there that actually show that just caring, period, can have a physiological impact on actually helping people recover from illness. In a blind study where you put a set of patients with a physician or a healthcare provider that they feel actually authentically cares about them and their well-being, and you put them against same condition, same treatment mechanisms, a healthcare provider where they felt they didn't have that caring relationship, the people who had or believe they have a caring healthcare provider actually recover from illness faster. It's remarkable. There's actually physiological power in caring as well. This is the answer. It may not be the only answer, but certainly this can be a foundational or primary driver of changing this around. Putting costs down, putting health up. Because if we care and people trust care, we'll actually may find out, and I believe this to be true, we will find out that people expect less of the system when they actually trust the system. We may find that out. They demand less healthcare resources when they trust the system and the resources being provided. We're out to prove that this relationship can come true in the United States healthcare industry, and it's really hard to take that inside of a large organization and do it from the inside out. I've been there with some of the largest, most influential healthcare organizations in the United States and made remarkable progress. But if you really want to transform an industry and take a big leap to the next generation, sometimes you have to start from scratch. And I'm so excited that over the past year we've been building and are about to launch Harken Health, which is an organization that we have designed from the ground up to focus on how would we design a healthcare organization that's built for caring. And so it's been a remarkable design journey to think about, okay, well, if we're going to do this from scratch and we're going to optimize around the service design, the experience being about that caring, that relationship, and about building trust and supporting people on their healthcare journey, what would we do? So to have that opportunity has been pretty delightful, and we've learned a lot, and we believe we have a very, very good perspective on what it takes to do that, and it's very, very different from the way in which healthcare is delivered today in the United States. And there's a number of specific elements. I mean, you all know that designing new services is extraordinarily complex. And some of these attributes up here represent the scope of the things that we're thinking about as we think about, well, if we're going to design this thing from caring, what are all the things that we're going to think about? If we're going to design and deliver healthcare services that are focused on relationships, relationship value, not production value. At the foundation of thinking about this holistically in healthcare is looking at insurance and looking at providers. And thinking about insurance, actually, it's thinking about getting insurance out of the way, because today insurance gets in the way of so many things. It's important. It's important. It's a needed service, but it serves a specific role, and that role, I think, can change so that it becomes a very supportive element. It's not in your way. It's there for you when you need it, but it helps give you access to the most extraordinary healthcare on the planet. And that's what we've been focusing a lot of time on doing. What does that look like? How do we put those two things in together that work seamlessly for people in a new and valuable way, and bringing that to life so that we can, again, prove that care, relationships, trust can lead to better health. I want to wrap up with just one final point, which is around, over the past many years, over the past many years, I've learned a lot about design, and I think there's one thing I've become pretty proficient with, which is around problem framing. I can frame a problem from so many different perspectives, and also then see a really broad range of possibility in solutions, which is a hallmark, one of the hallmarks, I think, of really good design, the ability to see a problem from numerous perspectives and see the world of possibility associated with those. So in my mind, I see a massive world of possibility, as do many of you. There's one thing in all that world of possibility that I do know in my heart for certain, is that in this world of possibility, there's one thing that we could really use a lot more of, and that's caring, right? Everybody agree? Please. Caring. Today, it's remarkable when we see elements of great caring, and you see them every once in a while, right? We see an organization that did this, or we see a person did this, and they catch a lot of attention, and to me that's somewhat awesome, but it's somewhat very, very concerning, because those things that means they're rare. They're rare. They don't happen enough. And when they do happen, they become these big things because it's so rare, and that's scary to me. One thing I'll ask you all to do as I leave is, please help me, and I think this would be an aspiration for all of us, regardless of whether you work in healthcare or any other in-service design. Let's make caring contagious. Thank you.